Stop Now, a social experiment enterprise.
Welcome back to Stop Now. I am Nate, and we are back this week with another great show.
Yes, and I'm Melissa. Welcome, everyone. We're live. Yay!
Yes, and since we are live, Melissa, we will need assistance from the audience out there. You know, it's not just a one-way street. We help each other. And so if there are technical issues or anything out there that you can help us with, let us know, and we can get our team working on that.
Absolutely. You are correct, Nate. So you might see some things, some little kids popping in. I know I have a couple might just pop up. So just bear with us. But we are here with our special guest today. Thank you so much.
Yes, we are so pleased, Melissa. And I wanted to get this bit of information out of the way really quick before we get into our conversation with our guest this week. Folks, we are interactive, so you can call us at 512-298-4047. That's the number that's displayed on your screen, 512-298-4047. To get into this conversation and be a part of the conversation. Or if you prefer to send an email, you can email us at support@stop-now.org. Again, support@stop-now.org. So with all of that preamble stuff out of the way, Melissa, go ahead and introduce our wonderful guest to the folks this week.
All right. Yes, folks, we have today the Human Trafficking Legal Center rep, Martina, please. Vandenberg, am I saying this correctly?
That's right.
Got it.
Got on the first try.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us today. Please tell us more about the work that you do with the human trafficking.
Happy to. So thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to be with you this afternoon. The Human Trafficking Legal Center is based in Washington, D.C., but we work all across the nation. And the goal of the organization is for trafficking survivors to have lawyers. And so we work with firms that provide pro bono legal assistance for trafficking survivors, many of whom come to the United States thinking that they're going to have a wonderful job with a legal visa and a perfectly proper contract, and then discover that they're held in forced labor. So most of the cases that we handle, Melissa, are forced labor cases. Those are most of the cases that we refer out to pro bono counsel. And then we have other programs, but that's probably the most relevant for today.
So Martina, on this show, we spend a lot of time talking about, the immigration issue in America, and in particular the H-1B visa. And so, when we look at the issue of human trafficking, is there similarities or is there interconnectivity between all of these issues, or is it something separate?
So one of the things that we do is research, and we have databases of every single case filed in the United States in the federal courts, both as civil cases and as criminal cases. And one of the things that we track is what kind of visa someone came in on when they came to the United States and discovered that they were actually being held in forced labor. And so we have people who are coming into the United States who have A3 or G5 visas. Those are visas for domestic workers that are reserved for diplomats and international organization employers. We have B1, B2 visas, people who come in thinking that they're going to be domestic workers in households for a short period of time and they end up trafficked. We have TN visas. Those are special visas that people get under NAFTA, under the agreement, so you can come in from Canada or Mexico. And so I think what's shocking to people who think about human trafficking just by sort of reading about it in the papers, I think what's shocking is that, a lot of the trafficking is forced labor. Most people think of it just as sex trafficking. Forced labor is actually a significant problem in the United States.
That is interesting you say that. I know come some time ago, for a while, when I heard human trafficking, I would think of, sexual labor or people that are removing organs, unfortunately. So it's odd that people don't think of, human trafficking in this way. Why is that it's not a something on people's mind? It's not as out there, I feel like, as, sex trafficking or people removing organs.
Melissa, I think the problem is the movie Taken. I hate that movie.
Mm.
So the movie Taken is the Hollywood version of human trafficking, and Taken has been the narrative that everyone has repeated all along. And so this is changing a little bit. I feel like we're at a real moment of pivot and a real paradigm shift in people talking about trafficking, because now in the last few years, for the first time ever, people are talking about human trafficking in the context of global supply chains. People are talking about human trafficking in terms of children being held in forced labor on cocoa farms in Cote d'Ivoire, creating the chocolate that we all eat for Halloween and Valentine's Day. There's actually a case pending right now before the Supreme Court, brought by children from Mali who allege that they were trafficked into Cote d'Ivoire and held in forced labor harvesting cocoa. So things are changing, but I think we're still stuck in this dilemma where most of the press coverage that you see still focuses on the most sensationalized sex trafficking cases.
That is true. That is definitely.
And Martina, you talk about kind of the changing perception, maybe in the way people view this issue. I think, and not to get, too off track, but I feel like we have to address kind of the elephant or the donkey in the room, as it were, because the country will go through a paradigm shift come 2021. And, is it, in your, I guess the way I would phrase it is, in your estimation, in your view, in your observation, how much influence does our federal government have over solving the issue of human trafficking? And is this something that one administration can have a better handle on than a previous administration?
Nate, that is such a good question. And we have just come out of a really difficult 4 years because, for human trafficking survivors who come from abroad, one of the most important remedies that they can get is a special visa called a T visa. Mm-hmm. And that T visa, a trafficking visa, allows them to remain in the United States. It can then be converted into a green card, and that green card can then lead to citizenship. So T visas are core to what we do as lawyers supporting trafficking victims in the United States who are foreign born. Obviously, there are a lot of US citizens who are also trafficked, but if you talk about the community of foreign born victims, unfortunately, over the last 4 years, the Trump administration has essentially created death by 1,000, 1 million cuts. They have changed things in the T visa system and regulations and adjudication system that are invisible from the outside unless you live in that particular trench where you're actually waging these sort of visa battles. And it's become incredibly difficult to do the T visas. And in fact, the data just came out 2 days ago for the third quarter of FY 2020. And we have the highest number of denials of T visa applications in history by a factor of 2. And so we're getting an enormous slew of denials, and on grounds that we think are completely illegitimate. So the government has such power to interpret the regulations, to enforce the regulations, and to adjudicate the visas. And so we are hoping, against hope, that the next administration will essentially roll the dial back to normal when the adjudicators made decisions that were not based on this misreading of law.
Okay. So is there any type of warning signs for someone who's about to be human trafficked? Is there any way that they could know, like, this is the road to that, or they just, their visa's up and they're just automatically in it? Like, how does it just shift to that? There's any
So, Melissa, that's such a good question, because I think what we have now in the world is not pay to play, we have pay to work.
Mm,
If there's a visa where you're required to pay, that is an immediate red flag.
mm,
And so one of the major factors that we see for people coming into the United States, but not just the United States, all around the world, they deal with labor recruiters. The labor recruiters say you can get this phenomenally excellent visa that will lead to citizenship in whatever country. But for that, you need to pay me $25,000. Now, who has $25,000? Who even has $10,000? Who has $5,000? Particularly if you're looking for a job.
right.
And so people borrow enormous amounts of money, and so they arrive at their job already in debt bondage.
Mm. And again, for any of the viewers out there, if you want to get involved in the conversation, if you might have a question that you'd like to ask Martina or a story you'd like to share, you can reach us at 512-298-4047, 512-298-4047, or you can email us at support@stop-now.org. So I guess my next question, kind of piggybacking off of what Melissa just asked, Martina, is, okay, like let's say you missed the warning signs. Let's say you missed the red flags, and now you find yourself in this situation. Like, how does a person extricate themselves from that? Like, how do they keep themselves from getting too deep into it?
That's very difficult to answer. You know, there is a hotline in the United States, and so if people feel that they're being trafficked, they can call that hotline. The number is 1-888-3737-888. And that's probably sort of one step, because at least then you're reaching out to a hotline that can give you resources and recommendations on where you can go in your area.
Okay. Could you repeat that number one more time for the folks out there?
Of course, it's 1-888-3737-888.
Awesome. Yes. And so I guess, like, over your years of experience in this, like, what are some common themes from the stories that you've heard and the victims that you've helped, you know, get out of these situations? Like, is there a common theme and a common thread amongst all of these?
Most of the people that I've worked with over the years have come to the United States with one purpose, and that's to make money and send it to their children at home, right? So their goal has been to support family members in their country of origin. And that is what is most painful to them, because they feel like they let their families down. And again, that debt scenario that I just mentioned, Melissa, in answer to your question, those families still have those debts, right? So the collectors are coming to the homes of the families. So people who come here and then are cut off from the outside world, unable to communicate with their family members anymore because they've been trafficked, not earning any money, not able to send money home to their families, not able to communicate with their families, who then escape and now are undocumented because many of these visas are tied to the employers. It's like an American kafala system. Now unemployed and unable to work in the United States, they are still trapped in this situation of being unable to send money home to their families to pay off the debt. And my heart goes out to people in that particular conundrum, because it's extremely difficult to recover and get back on your feet economically. It's also difficult to find pro bono lawyers who can take those cases, right? So one of the struggles that we have is placing cases with pro bono lawyers who are able to handle cases where someone has been held in forced labor with a legal visa.
Well, thank you for answering these questions for us. I believe we have some callers now.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Let's see.
Hey, you are so happy.
I was gonna say, like, my face doesn't match the gravity of the subject we're talking about, but I do appreciate that we've got folks calling in, because I think there are a lot of questions out here, Martina, that people don't often know, like, where do I turn to get these answers?
It's hard to know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First caller, can you hear us?
Yeah, the question here is like one of your guest last episode.
Okay.
You mentioned that H-1B visa holders can start a business. So I just want to ask the attorney, is that true or is it possible? Because why do they have this restriction that when we lose the job, we have to leave the country, and
Mm.
what is the logic behind?
So I actually don't know the answer to whether or not someone can sort of start a business after they leave an H-1B situation. So I'm not the right person to ask that question and can't answer it. But the way that these guest worker visas are tied, it's not just the H-1B, the A3 visa, the G5 visa, B1, B2 work visas. So many of these visas are tied to an employer.
Mm.
And once you walk out the door, you're essentially out of status. Now, some of these visas allow you to find another appropriate employer, right? So if you can find another sponsor, then
Mm-hmm.
for some of these visas you can work with a new sponsor. But in the middle of COVID, I mean, I think we all know how hard
Yeah.
it is to find a sponsor for anything.
And I was just going to ask you that, Martina, like, given the fact that, like, whether you're here on a visa or not, like, everybody around the world has been dealing with COVID-19 and the fallout from that, both from a health perspective and from an economic perspective. So what have you seen over the past 6, 7, 8 months, however long this year's been? It feels like forever. But what have you
The last
seen?
100 months, Nate, the
Yes,
last
the last
100.
100 months. What have been some of the effects of this pandemic on folks that are trying to enter this country through legal means?
So, it's just tragic, actually. People who had visas, who were trying to come in. And it hasn't just been the pandemic, Nate. It's been the way this administration has contorted the pandemic
Mm.
to block people from emigrating to the United States using COVID as an excuse. So that's happened at the southern border,
Mm.
and it's happened for people who tried to enter the country legally as well. And it makes your head spin, all of the sort of changes to the H-1B program midway through the entire process. It's extremely difficult to sort of keep up with the latest shenanigans on the immigration front in this country. But again, I think people should have some hope that we're heading back into a period of normalcy. And I hope that we're heading back into a period that will not be anti-immigrant,
Mm.
as this
Mm.
last 4 years has been. This has been a real scar on the United States.
Definitely. So, caller, were you still there? Did we have any more questions, or were we able to answer the question for you as best as we could?
I think there is a resource, though, that might be helpful. There's an organization called Justice in Motion,
Okay.
and they publish something every year. It used to be called Visas Inc., but they publish a document every year, and they have visa pages on their website.
Mm.
And so the website has a page for every kind of work visa imaginable under the US system.
Okay.
And I would actually send people to Justice in Motion, because that will have sort of the latest breaking news on what the regs are.
That is an excellent, and again, Justice in Motion would be the resource there.
That's right.
Awesome, awesome. Yes. So, thank you for calling. Like, we appreciate the dialogue again, because these are questions that Melissa and I might not have the expertise, and so we lean on our guests. And if you're still not satisfied with the answer, you can always email us, and have our support team do a little bit more research at support@stop-now.org. Martina, I think a good question for folks like me and Melissa, right? Like, we're not lawyers, we're not politicians, we're not legislators. Like, what can folks like Melissa and I, or some of the viewers out there, like, what can we do to help end human trafficking? What can we do to make this a thing that, like you said, like, we can return to a sense of normalcy and a sense where we appreciate immigrants rather than kind of demonize them?
So that's a really good question. And it's interesting. I think people used to say that you vote with your pocketbook and consumers make decisions. And I think all of that's true, but I think a lot of us now have become somewhat distressed by the lack of consumer action against forced labor.
Mm.
And, obviously things that are made without forced labor do cost more. That's absolutely true. Um, but we would love to see sort of more consumer action and more consumer outrage, frankly. There's also a number of laws that are being proposed right now, some of them focused on forced labor by Uyghurs in Xinjiang and in China. And some of the big corporations that produce things in Xinjiang are fighting the anti-forced labor statutes that have been
Mm.
proposed. So
Mm-hmm.
I think companies need to hear from people to know that we don't find it acceptable that they rely on recruiters who place people in forced labor.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I've found actually, Nate, is that, companies create layers of subcontractors in order to protect themselves, right? They create layers of plausible deniability.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you point to them and you say you're holding people in forced labor, they say, oh no, we have these subcontractors, right? These subcontractors, and we don't deal with the workers at all. And we just pay the subcontractor, and then the subcontractor pays the workers.
Mm.
That's not plausible deniability. That's willful blindness, right?
Yep.
That's a decision that you're making not to pay attention to the health and welfare and the criminality of this employment that people are being held in. So I think regular folks, number one, just talk to people about forced labor. Because again, as Melissa pointed out before, it really is a focus still on sex trafficking. And no denying, sex trafficking is an enormous problem and
Mm-hmm.
absolutely must be dealt with. But people don't talk about forced labor. And then secondly, I would say, support organizations that help people who are in forced labor. There's an organization called the Freedom Network USA,
Okay.
and the Freedom Network at USA has organizations and members throughout the United States. And so the other thing to do is, if you find yourself in a situation of forced labor and you don't want to call the national hotline, you can go on the Freedom Network USA list, and that list has organizations all over the country that help survivors of labor trafficking and also sex trafficking. And so those groups really
Mm.
need support.
It looks like we have a caller here. Hi,
Hi.
welcome.
Yeah, hi, Melissa. Hi. Yeah, I've been listening to this. It's very useful. And yeah, so I have few questions to ask. Can I ask?
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yeah, so like basically, I've been like doing some kind of show in YouTube. So what I have is like there are a lot of people. They were getting messages like in WhatsApp, like okay, we can get you a visa. And what they are asking is they're asking, okay, you send me like $500 initially for visa or something, and they were innocently sending it like, and they're losing the money. And after that, they don't know what to do in that case. So I just want to know like can we take like I'm here, I tried to like track few of them, but they blocked me after some time. Like I try to message them and try to find them where they are and all, but I'm not able to find the root of it. So if such cases, what can we do? Is there anything we can do to find
Mm.
out or how to help them? Because they're not able to come here, I'm sure they will not be able to get a visa. So how to help those kind of victim? It is not a big money, I know, but still there are a lot of victims. The number, if you see, like even I'm a small YouTuber, I'm getting like tens and like hundreds of messages similar to that.
Mm.
I just want to know if anything we can do about it.
So that's visa fraud, right?
Yeah,
Trying to sell US visas is visa
correct.
fraud. And there is an agency at the State Department called the Diplomatic Security Service. It
Okay.
has a fraud unit that investigates fraud involving US visas.
Okay.
So if there is a way to sort of report that to the State Department, I mean, this sounds like a fraud that's going on abroad, right? This is people in another
Yeah,
country who are sort of offering to sell US visas.
correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things is just to educate people to let
Mhm.
them know that under US law, these visas are not for sale, right? There is an enormous fee for some of them, right? There's a
Yeah,
filing fee, that's not small.
Mm-hmm.
But there shouldn't be a kind of recruiting fee. There were cases way back before the internet, there were cases that I would hear about where literally middlemen would sell visa applications to people who couldn't get a visa application, who wanted to apply to for a visa to come to the United States. And that's visa fraud too. Like, these applications aren't for sale. The internet has obliterated that kind of fraud, but sort of new kinds of fraud have come in. The other thing to be really wary about, Melissa, you were asking earlier about warning signs. When you see an advertisement that says, fly now, pay later, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
another sign that someone is going to be either docking your paycheck or demanding payment when you get back to your country of origin.
Okay, got it. Yeah, this is very good. And yeah, one last question, if time permits, can I ask that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so like in Canada, I know there are kind of different kinds of visa for like a low level jobs. Like we can go for and work as a, like in construction or something similar to that,
Mm-hmm.
and people can pay around, I believe, like $2,000 or $3,000, and they do get a visa and they do come here and work on those jobs. So I believe I like I'm seeing a lot of people are saying same way you can come to US also. So I just want to know if you know, is there similar visa is available, or is it just like scam they're doing?
So again, I would be very wary of anybody saying, pay me $2,000 and I'll get you a visa, right? There are visas that are, H-1B visas are obviously high skilled laborers, people with engineering degrees and advanced degrees.
True.
There are other visas to come to the United States, H-2As, those are largely agricultural workers, H-2Bs. There are sort of J-1 visas for people to come to the United States. But I have to be frank, we've seen abuse and we've seen labor exploitation, and some exploitation that even rises to the level of human trafficking on all of these visa schemes. And
Okay.
so the main message that people need to receive is that even if you have a legal visa and even if you think you have a job that's completely legit coming to the United States, be very careful, right?
Okay.
Keep a copy of your passport in a separate place. Keep a copy of your passport with your family before you leave. Make sure that you have the phone number of your embassy in the country that you're going to. Make sure that you even have, a secondary cell phone. Um, we've seen cases of people hiding things in their shoes, and like, so they would have access to people who were particularly concerned and worried. When you come through U.S. Customs, and actually when you do your visa interview, the U.S. government now is required to give you a brochure, and that brochure, which was partly written by non-governmental organizations in coordination with the U.S. government, that brochure is essentially a know your rights brochure. It's been
Mm-hmm.
translated into multiple languages. You can find it on the State Department website. The State Department website, if you Google on the State Department site, know your rights, it'll pop up. And it has essentially small descriptions of the rules and your rights for any kind of visa. So in answer to your question, yes, there are other visas, but those visas also present potential problems.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for answering. It helps.
No problem. Thank you for your call. Like, we,
Thank
again,
you.
this is what it's all about, getting information out there that folks can use. So we appreciate you calling in.
Thank you. Thanks.
Morning. Have a good one.
All
He
right.
actually ended up asking something, or you mentioned something that I always wanted to ask. Like, is there like a brochure or information packet as people, get these visas and they're coming into the country with like a facts to know thing, or like some kind of a orientation to help them read
Mm-hmm.
through, the false and the true?
One of the things that Congress also mandated, Melissa, is that there be a video on infinite loop in US consulates and US embassies, that essentially that video contains the same information that the brochure includes.
Mm.
And so
Oh,
that
that's not
that
a bad idea.
yeah,
Would be.
yeah. So it's particularly useful for people who aren't completely literate,
Mm-hmm.
and easier, or people who remember better just sort of watching something or listening to it, somebody who's not who would prefer not to kind of read an entire brochure. And so that has been very helpful in helping uh, people know what the warning signs are, but even more than that, knowing what they can do,
Right.
and also knowing that they have rights. I
Mm-hmm.
think one problem is people who come to the United States from abroad Their employers tell them, you have no rights here. If you leave, you'll be arrested and deported. I can call ICE on you. You
Hmm.
have to do exactly what I say. That power imbalance can somewhat be rectified by knowledge of workers' rights when they enter the US market.
Mm. Is that something that can be fixed, Martina? Like just the dynamics of power uh, for these corporations and these companies versus the visa holder? Is that just something that we'll always have to deal with?
I think one of the things, Nate, that makes that power imbalance less forceful is portability. Right.
Mm,
So if you can move from one employer to another and take
yes.
your visa and go to another workplace, that means that that employer has much less power over you, much less hold over you. Now, it's not easy to find a new job. It's not easy to find a new sponsor for your visa. Like I'm not saying that any of this is easy. What I am saying is that having an employer use a visa like a chain
Hmm.
should not be allowed. A visa
Okay.
should not be a shackle. A visa needs to be something that you can move from employer to employer.
Mm.
Would you say that that's why there are more cases than there should be because people are afraid, their employers are scaring them into, coming forward and saying, "Hey, this is not okay. I have rights." They feel like they have families that they have to provide for. So,
Hmm.
maybe they don't come forward the way that you think that they would because their employers are scaring them into not talking about it.
So, Melissa, I think the main form of threat that we see is threat of deportation.
Hmm.
For people who have given so much and sometimes paid so much and sometimes borrowed so much to get to the
Hmm.
United States, that threat of deportation is terrifying. And under the law, forced labor is by force or coercion, right? There can be
Hmm.
force, there can be coercion. One of the typical forms of coercion that we see is called abuse of the legal process. That's essentially telling someone that you're going to use the law in a way that the law was never intended to be used. It's turning the law into a bludgeon to harm someone
Hmm.
that the law is supposed to protect. And by and large, the cases that we see are not cases where someone is chained to a radiator, not cases where people are, beaten with bats in order to force them to work. Like we've moved away from that kind of model of chattel slavery where people were
Hmm.
whipped and literally chained. Now, what we have are threats of abuse of the legal process, including threats of deportation. And if you take the entirety of the circumstances that people find themselves in, of course they're going to stay. The
Hmm.
alternative is too terrifying of being
Hmm.
undocumented in a country that makes you feel unwelcome, where the only labor that you can do is on the gray market, if at all, and where you live under the constant threat of arrest and deportation in any event. So the stakes are so high for people who are trapped in the United States in that way.
And again, like you'd mentioned earlier, Martina, like hopefully, obviously a president or an administration doesn't fix everything,
Mhm.
but hopefully once we get into 2021, the temperature will come down a little bit, and that because I do feel like it's a threat that's intangible, but you can just feel it if you're in that situation, and it's something I think maybe folks might have empathy with now, just going through COVID, where you can't control all the variables and you don't know if your job's going to still be there. And so I would hope that maybe folks can have empathy now going forward.
So Nate, I completely agree with you, and I do think that things will likely shift, but I also think that we need to have actually comprehensive immigration reform.
Hmm.
The entire immigration system that works in these very unfortunate ways, and an immigration system that allows this kind of abuse to occur, we need comprehensive immigration reform to rationalize this system so that workers are protected.
I agree. And let's see.
Absolutely. We have a caller,
There
and
we go. I was just gonna say, do we have any more callers on the line?
yes, I mean, the question was like with regard to the employer's abuse. He has shared a file. I thought of playing that file out and ask the question afterwards.
Was not my see. My choice was to pay the whole 5325 and I'll file your H1B. That was the only thing that I had when I called you, when you said that you will be paying $1,000. From my notes, I see it was supposed to. I don't even know if what we have collected from you so far.
Yeah, that's the
So
thing.
you tell me, right? It is not that I am telling you something that is new. This is something that you knew, something that you knew. A work authorization comes at a cost. H1B, we always said comes at a cost. Doesn't work that way.
I understand. I know that business doesn't work in that way. Like I do agree on that. You just have to give me some breathing space. Things have changed so much, right? I'm not making here a bargain and right. I am just trying to survive.
So
That's
this,
the logic, right?
yeah.
Otherwise, like I
So
would
this
have
is
even
exactly about money. This is something you should have thought about at that time. So maybe we would have even filed the H1B, isn't it? You knew
exactly.
even at that time that this was, this is something that you have to pay. If I don't want this kind of an added job, right? For me, I already have enough and more on my plate with H1Bs and their RFPs itself, right? I don't want to have this conversation for me. It's a pure waste of time because this is something that is discussed. You have issues, you have things. Should I be bothered? Not really. Because your H1B is filed and it has been picked up. And now we are working on RFP and I don't have no money from you. Our money has already been can cash from USCIS on. So where leave me? So if I start telling you my issues, right, then will that work? It doesn't work. So you just tell me now, when are you going to pay me? That's all I want to know. I don't want to know, there is issues, you're not here, I have to trust you. I don't want to know all that. You tell me, when will you give me the money? That's all I want to know.
But then, like, I have no money, right? How do I survive with my family? That is a problem. It's not that I have money and I don't want to give and I just want to get my H1B and get away with it, right? I'm not, right? I have to survive. On that aspect, I am just requesting. I'm requesting in help. So please don't misunderstand me. And what do you want me to do then?
She's telling you when you can pay and how you can pay. I mean, I'm a little confused because first we already decided that you're going to pay in installments and then see if the money, the pay raise which is going to be increased, would it help her or not?
Yes.
But now you're saying that you don't have the money, so what is it? This is a little confused. We are waiting till August 14th. It means we are ready to give you chances. Mm-hmm. We have been giving chances and we are still waiting, and I'm still working with you on your terms to see how we can come up with a plan. Nobody here even had a conversation or a talk wherein we told you, oh, we are going to tell you lump sum you pay or leave. We never even said that. But that's apart from the point. You went all around in the circle. But let me just tell you, send an email with your rate confirmation. I will check it, come up with a calculation as to how that extra $2 is going to help us recover that 5,325 that we spent. And we're going to spend again some money which we won't take from you for RFP. We will come up with a number. If that number is going to take forever, then I'll come back to you and say, hey, this much I'll recover from here, but this much you'll have to pay me again in installments. All right? Okay. So send an email and we will take it forward.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So this was the recorded conversation that was sent to us. And the person said, like, I tried everything, reporting to Department of Labor, USCIS, and nothing happened. He says, like, all the employers are violating and they are asking money for sponsoring H1B. So he has been struggling for more than 5 years. And the strange thing is, like, they told him to send money on FedEx, small amount, $500 something, so that like it cannot be tracked. And this has been going on for more than 15-20 years. That's what he says. So it is a shocking thing. I don't know how the uh, attorneys are going to respond to this.
Mm.
So it's illegal for an employer to ask the H-1B visa applicant to pay the H-1B visa fee. The employer has to pay the H-1B visa fee to apply. And the Department of Labor is supposed to monitor and enforce this entire visa scheme and all of the labor-based visas. So the one thing I can say, and I can't comment on this specific video or this specific audio tape because I don't sort of know the context. But the one thing I'll say is, I already talked about fraud and I already talked about force and coercion. That gives rise to an allegation of forced labor.
Mm.
And you can be convicted for forced labor if you use if you use force or coercion. Fraud is a separate category. And if you use fraud in the context of labor contracting, like in labor contracting H-1B visas, these are married. If you use fraud in that context, then victims who are victims of fraud and foreign labor contracting may be eligible for U visas, right?
Okay.
So people who are victims of trafficking can be eligible for T visas. People who are victims of fraud and foreign labor contracting can be eligible for U visas. The trick there is that you have to report it, obviously, and you have to have a certification from a US government or some sort of law enforcement official saying that you've cooperated and that this is indeed the crime of fraud and foreign labor contracting. There's also a huge backlog for U visas. But in the context where someone is being extorted, someone is being forced to pay, if it's connected to the work, if you have to do the work and then your salary is being withheld or docked, that can actually be a very old crime called peonage. And peonage is when you are essentially held in debt servitude and the money that you're using to pay off that debt isn't really used to pay off the debt, right? The debt may keep growing and growing and growing. One of the problems that we see is people borrow money at huge interest rates.
Yep.
And then have to pay back that debt with enormous amounts of interest, which causes their debt bondage to balloon. I would, in a circumstance where someone who's come to the United States on a visa, where that person is now being extorted for money, again, a huge red flag, probably worth a call to the hotline. I do think that there's insufficient supervision of these labor visa schemes and certainly insufficient prosecution. Every once in a while, you do see a prosecution. I'll give you an example. A case investigated by the Department of State Diplomatic Security Service, that office that's engaged in rooting out visa fraud, brought a case against a labor broker here in the United States who brought workers in from India on H-1B visas and then benched them. Benching is a practice where you bring someone into the country and you claim that you have a job for them, but actually you don't have a job for them. You just want to have somebody on your bench who's ready immediately in case a job comes through the transom. And from the perspective of the people who are bringing these workers in to bench them, they don't care necessarily that the workers aren't working. And the reason they don't care is because they've already been paid. Someone already in the country of origin has already paid them whatever the amount may be, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for the privilege of getting a legal visa for what seems to be a decent job. And then you arrive in the United States and you find yourself benched. So I was on a panel with a trafficking survivor years ago, and this trafficking survivor who had come to the United States on an H-1B visa expecting to find a good job said in the course of this panel discussion, the whole time I lived in the United States, every day I would go fishing. Now, for someone like me, every day going fishing, that sounds like vacation, right? It sounded like you came to the United States and every day was vacation and you just went fishing. That wasn't it at all. This person didn't have a fishing pole. This person was going down to the beach with his coworkers who had all been benched and didn't have work, although they still had debt and they still had visas. They would go down to the beach and try and catch fish with their bare hands because they had no food. For him, fishing was not a recreational sport. For him, fishing was a matter of pure survival. Yep. Now, I think it's unfathomable for all of us here in the United States to even think of a situation of someone who came over in good faith, using the legal system, prepared to work, eager to work, probably skilled, and they're fishing out, literally, fish, trying to survive. That shouldn't happen.
No. Not in a country that, you know, if we supposedly live up to our ideals, Martina, and you know, give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, you know, folks that want to work, this should be an inviting place, but
Absolutely.
far too often it's not.
Absolutely. I mean, as they say in Hamilton, immigrants get the job done, right? but we have to have to make it possible for them to work in a legal system that does not put them at risk, that is not potentially exacerbating the hazard.
So I'm glad you brought up Hamilton, because as much as I've enjoyed this conversation, it can't be nonstop, Martina. So Melissa, unless you have any other questions, I'm going to pass the microphone to Martina to give us a little bit more info on the Human Trafficking Legal Center. And if there's folks out there who might have more questions, how can they get in touch and reach out to find these answers?
Thank you, Nate. So the Human Trafficking Legal Center, the website is www.htlegalcenter.org. For more information, you can email info@htlegalcenter.org. We do try to place cases and refer cases out to pro bono counsel. We can't always place a case. It's often hard to find a lawyer to do things for free, but we try. And you know, if people have questions and want to learn more generally about human trafficking, if you go to our publications page, we have a whole array of articles and publications that we've written about a host of issues. So misuse of material, witness warrants to arrest and prosecute and hold trafficking victims to force them to testify. We actually also, one thing that may interest this audience is we have a list on our publications page of every case filed where the victim had an underlying legal visa. And it's organized by legal visa category. So A3s, G5s, B1, B2, TN, all the legal visa categories, and then the associated criminal and civil cases that have been brought under the trafficking statute.
Very good. And again, you can head over to htlegalcenter.org for more information. We appreciate your time, Martina. It's been good catching up and meeting you, and hopefully we can speak with you again down the road.
Terrific. Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Melissa, for inviting me today.
No problem. We enjoyed having you. Thank you so much.
All right, so that's going to do it for this week, Melissa, but we'll be back next week, Thanksgiving. So I'm assuming that we're going to have some turkey and some stuffing here on the show, but we'll be back next week to talk to the people with more stories and more information.
I'm going to take a nap, Nate. My son doesn't have school, so no virtual tutoring. But I'm going to stop now there. You guys all have a great holiday, and thank you for joining. Bye for now.
Bye.
The Trafficking Legal Center has one goal, and that is for trafficking survivors to thrive. We envision a world where there is systems change, where there is maximum impact. For those of you who have been with us since the very beginning and have supported this work from day one, we are so grateful for your partnership and your support. For those of you who are new to the Human Trafficking Legal Center and are just tuning in and learning about this work this evening, welcome. Welcome to this community. We hope that you will join us in partnership as well in this fight for freedom and this fight for justice. The Human Trafficking Legal Center envisions a world where traffickers can no longer operate with impunity. We envision a world where trafficking survivors can lead the movement. But to do this, to accomplish this, we need you. We need your partnership. So please enjoy the program this evening, and please join with us to fight for a world where trafficking survivors can lead and trafficking survivors can thrive. Thank you.
Stop Now, a social experiment enterprise. Stop H-1B Visa, a campaign to end modern slavery. True stories, life-changing moments. Stop, listen, share. Join us. Call us. Together, we create the future.